why are we so willing to let boys fall behind in education, or men kill themselves in such alarmingly high rates, or why we don't care that so many men, fathers, are losing children? Like, why are we so sort of, what this male malaise, where we're just like, why are we so insensitive to it? There's like loads of people in the space that literally like get cancelled or kill themselves or get murdered.
Wow.
I was shooting like an interview of Erin Pitsey, who set up the first refuge in the world for abused women, and also wrote the first book on domestic violence against women. And when she realised domestic violence isn't a gendered issue and tried to open a shelter for men, like, her life was ruined. She went from like national hero, having saved thousands of women across the UK, to like public enemy number one, with like police escorts and picketing outside every event and bomb squad going through her letters, and left the country altogether eventually. So it's,
wow.
There is genuine risks to this sort of thing, unfortunately. But not that I've experienced anything quite that exciting, but I'd rather not make it too easy.
But
people.
there is that awareness.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Same for Earl Silverman, exactly the same in Canada. No refuge for men at all. No shelters for male victims of abuse anywhere in Canada. And he turned his house into a refuge for men at his own expense. Not a single cent in public funding from Canada, from the government. And he lost everything, lost all his job, all of his belongings, lost his house, lost his shelter, killed himself. And then in his suicide letter, it said, maybe my death will create a need. And it hasn't created a need, because he died 10 years ago, and there's no shelters in Canada still. So it's like...
So what was his thing? What was the reason he got so much attention?
Just talking about male victims of abuse is extremely unpopular, and he was a male victim of abuse. He was being abused by his wife, I believe. He would go to get help, and then the police would treat him as an abuser, so like re-traumatizing him. And he had nowhere to go, so he was like, I will be the change I want to see in the world, to quote Gandhi. And he lost everything, lost everything, including his own life. And it happens quite often. It's just like very lonely experience. And it's just like a lot of people come and go in this space because they don't get any support, and then they just can't go any further, and they're like, I've done my bit, I've moved the needle a little bit. I mean, I'm a bit like that. It's very difficult. And unless you don't get any brand deals, let's put it that way. There's no brand deals, there's no coupon codes for me, there's none of that, and that's okay. Like I'm privileged enough to have built up enough passive income and financial security from the last 10 years of professional life that I can afford to say what I want without any risk to my work, because I'm self-employed. And it's genuine risk.
When you say support, what do you mean by there's no support? And what would support look like for you if you were to, feel like you are supported, and not just by people agreeing or wanting to be a part of the conversation?
I mean, well, in the context of domestic violence,
just for you in the areas that you operate in now, right? And you talk about, and the spaces that you go to, and the kind of audiences that you attract.
There's loads of things. I mean, I don't need brand. I mean, I'm joking about the brand deals. But
support, because it's important, right?
I get every single day. I get messages from men and women all over the world thanking me.
Yeah.
And that's all the support I really need. It doesn't pay my mortgage, but I mean, it's more important in many ways. I mean, I'm very familiar in this space because I am a filmmaker too. And although I can make content for free, sat at my laptop, just putting up carousels, I really would like to make a documentary. But as you know, there are hard costs to filmmaking. Like, it's not unreasonable to spend £100,000 on a documentary, and that's still quite low budget.
Yeah. And
I don't mind not making money, but I can't lose money. I already give enough of my time and emotional well-being, but I just don't. And I'd just love for someone to come along, some philanthropist, and be like, we love what you're doing, we love all this content, and we'd love to give you a budget to create a documentary. So the Tin Men documentary would be like one of many dreams.
What would the documentary entail?
I mean, the thing is, I'm never short of ideas, because there are so many things that no one talks about in this space because they're scared of it. I always describe it like the garden of forbidden fruit, like male victims of abuse and male victims of sexual assault and the fatherlessness crisis, and no one wants to talk about them, and I don't mind so much. So I'm just there eating all this fruit, gobbling it all up, and it's great for original content because no one wants to talk about it. But the issue I think I would love to make a documentary about, male disposability, and how the lives of men and boys seem to be worth less than the lives of women and girls, despite what people tell us. That's very much counterintuitive, and we can go into that. But I fundamentally believe that to be true. And male disposability, for me, is like the common denominator that exists beneath all the issues I talk about, whether it's homelessness or addiction, incarceration, domestic violence. They're all male disposability.
Yeah.
The life of a male is more disposable. And yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And that seems to me one of the fundamental issues that if we could understand that more and why that happens and perhaps undo it, I think a rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. So that's the ultimate supervillain that I'm trying to slay. So yeah, something along those lines. And the Tin Men is also sort of like a 3 or 4 year long research and development project where I'm trying different approaches, different styles, different words, different infographics to see what is the cheat code to unlock people's compassion for men. Like, how do I talk about these things in a way that doesn't create outrage, whilst also not rounding off the corners completely. I don't want to water it down, but I don't want to be too antagonistic. So all these different balancing acts going on, and it's all going in here. So I am ready to make a documentary. If someone's got £100,000, I'll give you a big shout out if you make a documentary. And I'd just love to do that. That'd be so much fun.
Good, man. Make it happen.
Well, I'm currently got I'm £100,000 short, and we're digging into my sort of it's like a therapy session now. But I have a bit of an imposter syndrome. But I don't want to ask people for money.
How often? Because I think it's healthy to have imposter syndrome now and again. But it just how many times of day do you actually have that, or week, or when does it show up?
Well, people keep asking like, how do I donate money to you? I'm like, don't give it to me. Give it to Mankind, or give it to Susie Bennett, or the Samaritans, or Mind. But I do need money, and one of the reasons I struggle is just because the shame that comes with this space. You do absorb it, and because you're told it's such a shameful thing to talk about men and boys in this kind way, in a compassionate way, and even put the idea of men's issues together, very unpopular. And although I know in my mind that there's nothing shameful about talking about men in this way, it's clearly sinking in because I struggle to ask for help in terms of financial help because I don't think I deserve it, despite how many kind words I get sent. And I guess I've just got to get over that a little bit. But also, I'm not rich, but I'm not struggling for money. Like, there are people that I would much rather get the money than me. That's always going to be the case, right? Yeah, but there's people that have loads more money than me that don't deserve any of it, in my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if you are connected to that documentary, then accept the money. I think if you have something to point people to, when you don't have that, when I don't have something that I'm building over here, or there's not a direct link to where the money's going necessarily, accepting it doesn't feel quite tangibly right at the time. Yeah. But pointing people to, it's just charities though, right? Charities, we know the common story with charities and how much money of that money actually goes towards, they still operate in the same system in which companies do. And it's it's a common problem. Well,
there is some money going into the space, still not enough, but it tends to go to the people that say that the kind things still, the ones that exist on a more of a superficial level, are more often getting the money, and whereas the people like me who are down the bottom playing around in the mud with the dragons, it's very difficult to get funding. And I refuse to round off anything. I don't want to pull any punches. I remember sitting with quite an influential politician about a campaign I'm going to release soon about Minister for Men, and it was all these different issues, 10 or 12 different issues on postcards, and I gave them to him. And I was like, what do you think about these issues? Which of these will go down well in Westminster? And he was just taking them out. And one of the cards he took out was, it's legally impossible for a woman to rape a man in the UK. So it's by law, a woman cannot rape a man. To be considered rapist by law, you have to have a penis. And I was like, that is just not acceptable. It should be gender free. And he took that out, and I was like, why are you taking that out? And he was like, that will upset the politicians, and you might alienate yourself from a lot of women. And I'm like, I'm not going to throw men under the bus to help a politician feel more comfortable. And I just fundamentally disagree to do that. But people that would roll them under the bus and will go back to that high level of kind words, they will often get more money, or any money, than me.
What part, and I want to come back to the point about the disposability of men, but on the politicians and getting things into that arena to be looked at, how much do you think room there is to notice that problem, not related to the topic or the subject that you're trying to raise, but it's actually a systemic problem of how things are, there's like an inability to change, and there's a reluctance, and it's a hard, like drug policy, like racism, like whatever arena you look at, or whatever topic you look at, if any of those things get raised in the political arena, laws, etc., it's just so hard in this country to just even get a look in, or like get them looked at, even like things like relating to health, food, like how hard it is to actually like pass, I don't know what the correct terminology is, but like pass the laws, to like change things.
Well, I have a highly cynical view of politicians. I fundamentally,
rightly so.
As it stands, I'm not going to vote for anyone. I'm going to go and support a ballot in the general election next month. Labour are sort of turning my head. I always vote Labour. I'm sort of moving away from them for many reasons, but at a minute I'm supporting the ballot. And my fundamental position on politicians is that they don't care about anything other than themselves and getting votes.
For a few years.
Yeah, and so they'll say whatever they want, regardless of the issue, as long as it gets them votes.
Yeah.
That's what's called politicking. And I just see it all the time. And there's nothing that will lose you more votes than talking about men and boys issues. Like, we hear about this patriarchy, but I haven't seen a single male politician or female politician ever talk about men and boys issues. Some of the issues we can talk about today. I'm like, well, if this is so patriarchal, surely politicians will be lining up to create a minister for men. But they're not. And I ran in, my local MP from Labour, she knocked on my door last week, and I ran downstairs and my girlfriend told me who it is. I was like, I need to talk to her. And then she's like, who are you going to vote for? I was like, I'm going to support a ballot. And she's like, why? And I was just like, no one writes any policies I'm interested in. I'm interested in gang violence and knife crime and boys being behind in education, male suicide. And I was just like, well, I want a minister for men. And she literally said, no one's going to give you that. And I was like, that's exactly my point. And then I was like, goodbye, and closed the door, and that was the end of the conversation. And I admire her honesty, because that is absolutely true. And I would have been more annoyed had she pretended like, oh yeah, that's interesting, because it's not interesting. And she said, like, no one's going to give you that. Not Labour, not the Conservatives, not no one. And it's absolutely true. And it's just not right that the biggest risk to my life and your life is suicide every single day,
risk
every
to
day.
Himself. Yeah.
And it's like, that's just not right. And the fact that we can't even consider the idea of having a minister for men to look into the issues that cause male suicide is a damning indictment of politics. And the fact that a politician can practically scoff at the idea, you're not going to get that, is quite scary and very counterintuitive to what we're told about politics, about being a country built to the advantage of men. And there are certainly advantages to being a man in this country, but there are certainly disadvantages too. And I'm more than happy to delineate.
What do you think has to happen for us to take these things more serious, top level? And be as direct as possible. Like, what do you think has to happen for us to start really considering these things as?
Do what I did. But tell a politician what you want, and if that's not what you want, tell him you're not going to get the vote. Close the door on him. That takes time, I think. But on a personal level, I feel like we need to reconsider our view of gender equality and how sexism is a two-way street. It goes both ways. And these blanket concepts like male privilege and the patriarchy are very low resolution, divisive views that are, for every year that goes ahead, become less and less relevant. And the fact there are issues such as education, where 50 years ago women and girls were behind, 50 years on today, men and boys are even further behind than they were. So we've done such a great job in bringing women and girls into education, as an example, that men and boys are now falling behind, and because we can't comprehend the idea of boys and men needing some sort of intervention to get them back into education, like we'll never sort of use our vote in that way. So I would say we need to, in many ways, acknowledge the progress we've made for women and girls, and reset our view, a more modern view that is truly inclusive and not ideological, based on evidence, and like I said, modern. And
how much energy does this take from you rather than give you?
It is exhausting. It is really exhausting.
Because it is being in the mainstream of things.
Yeah.
I've checked out. Like, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because it's not my place. I'm like, what can I do over here? What can I control? How can I control this and get this fit for service, and then be that, and then start things, and then invite men and create environments that are like intuitively safe and collected, like co-created, and doing things that have worked for me and helped me get into alignment and integrity, and like just setting my life up, getting all the pillars in check, like in alignment, and then like creating that space, and then watching the ripples help. And it has worked. And I'd love to talk to you about those things. But like, I guess to go on from the question of like, how much does it take from you? It's like being in the mainstream. It's like, it is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's like, how much time do you think you're gonna give to this? Because like, I appreciate you and I thank you for being that voice, but I'm also, it's a part of me that's like wow, it's like brick wall
It
head.
is, yeah. I mean, I make a lot of my content first thing in the morning whilst I'm in bed. I wake up, I sit in bed for like 2 or 3 hours, and I maybe do 2 or 3 hours in the evening, and I'm working in between. And I'm like up at 7 a.m. and I'm reading like data on like child trafficking, or like boys in London being stabbed to death, or like sexual abuse against like men. And it's just like, my girlfriend's just like, isn't this a bit early? You're not even like you've not even brushed your teeth or had a shower, and you're there just like reading this pretty traumatic thing. And I am pretty good at distancing myself, and I'm quite resilient, but eventually that drip will get to you, and it is very exhausting. But for the time being, the reward vastly outweighs the cost. And because there's so few people in a space, perhaps I might be the only one of my kind.
What does that mean?
Well, from the left-wing point of view, from a left-wing progressive point of view, in a way that is not... there's loads of people yelling on TikTok and YouTube about these things. Yeah. And like, you talk about Andrew Tate and Pearl and Fresh and Fit, and I do not want to associate myself whatsoever. I hate them as much as everyone. And probably more so because I hate them for additional reasons of my own. But in terms of talking in a left-wing progressive point of view about men and boys in a way that isn't rounding off the edges and isn't pulling punches and is not apologetic, I don't know who else is doing it, and I would love to meet them if they are. And like, ego aside, like at the level I'm doing it, at least at the quality of work I'm producing, I don't see that. And people always ask me, where do I find more accounts like you? And I'm like, you're shit out of luck. There aren't. That's it. That's me. And that makes it rewarding, and it's quite sad, but at the same time I think about what would happen if there was none. Like, sure, one's better than nothing.
But the hate is always going to be louder. The love it's a lot. There's a lot of love, and there's a lot of people following. There's a lot of people I know that follow you.
I don't want anyone to get the violin out for me, because although there are some people like trolls that come in and call
But that's the metric, right? It's how many ears do you have? How many people are paying attention, and how many people resonate with the message and agree? And there's a lot.
I get far more support than criticism, far more. Like, we're talking like 10 to 1 or more. And I'm very grateful, especially from mothers. I get so many messages from mothers of boy mums being like, I just never considered it. And that's another place where I find myself alienated, because a lot of people on the left who talk about these issues, they try to package in a way of how it benefits women. Like, don't you want better male allies? And talking about men doesn't mean you're not talking about women, and having better men in your life is better for you. Basically trying to show it out, how it benefits women, and it does, but I'm always like, the primary benefactor are boys and men, and they deserve this issue. They deserve this discussion in their own right, without an apology, without a disclaimer. And I have this conversation a lot with people in this space, people like Richard Reeves, and he's like, well, I'm trying to talk to women, I'm trying to sell it to them, I'm trying to show how it benefits. I might listen, Richard, I get messages every day from women. Not one of them has said, how does this benefit me? Never had that message. But I get messages all the time. Thank you for letting me know how I can support men better. Thank you for helping me understand men. And to think that women would only be interested in this set of issues for their own benefit is fundamentally a narcissistic point of view, and a very dim view of women, in my opinion. The fact is, women do care. Some of my most vocal followers and earliest followers are women. 1 in 4 of my followers are women, so that's tens of thousands. And they care not for their own benefit, but because they care and love men. They have men in their life they want to understand and help. And we don't need to make this look like it's a benefit to women. That is a secondary benefit, and the primary benefactor is men and boys. And like I said, very few people doing this, fewer people still on the left, and fewer people still on the left from that point of view. and that's why I feel like I'm the only one. And if I'm wrong, I would love to be wrong, because I'd love to have a bit of competition, a bit of like creative crosstalk.
But there is a lot of people, women, thinking, how's this going to benefit me?
I've not met him. I've never.
So Richard Rees says that.
Yeah.
And that's his kind of.
He'll say, helping men will make better allies to women, and he'll say he does that because he's trying to appeal to women. And my argument is that I've never had a single woman ask, how does this benefit me?
Sure.
But I've had thousands of women message me saying, I'm a better ally to men, and I understand men better as a result. And they're here to help men, not to help themselves. Mm-hmm. And if anything, I felt Richard's point of view is very dim view of women and very insulting of women. It makes women seem like they're narcissists when they're absolutely not. And I'm sure there's women out there. I never met one. Mm-hmm. And I don't agree. And I think it's long-term undermining the very cause that we're talking about, where the fact of the matter is men and boys deserve this conversation in their own right. And there's no apology needed after that.
See, the circles that I'm in and the places I go, when we have these discussions, that's the majority. It's the biggest voice. It's the how can we support, help, like really contribute to the conversation, and it's like, how can we get past what holds men back from showing up for themselves?
I have a lot of. This is one of the things I'm constantly changing my mind on. Like, what is the value of men's spaces where men talk? Obviously, there's a lot of value in terms of it gives men an outlet for distress. I would argue it doesn't solve the problem that causes their distress. But I have this. One of the way I've changed my mind from talking to people such as yourself is that how will we know what men are experiencing unless we actually listen to what they've got to say? Like, so men talking is extremely important. More important than perhaps I've been presenting in the past, because it helps us find out what they're talking about. So if you and I were to sit about the cameras and you would tell me what you're going through, if you'd tell me different traumatic experiences.
I'll do it with the cameras if you want to ask.
Well, I mean, sure. How would I ever know how to support you without knowing what's happening to you?
Absolutely.
And if you were losing your child in family court, or if you were in an abusive relationship, the first step is understanding that. But that is not the final step. The next step is for me to go away and be like, I need to help Chris get more support, or understand what's happening to your child, or help him out of debt. But the fact of the matter is, male distress isn't just in their brain, caused by some sort of toxic mindset to be expunged through talking. The problem that men face are all out there, like women. And how do we understand what those problems are out there unless we allow people such as yourself to talk about them? And again, like, we need to let men speak about these issues in their own words, without telling them men can talk, but don't talk about that or this or these things.
Yeah, or trying to fix it for them.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, where this comes at kind of an intersection, because what I see is a lot of, when men do speak up, when any human really speaks up, the cultural narrative is to say, well, look on the bright side, or do this, or like try and fix it, when really it's just a systemic problem, which I see, is we have a therapeutic system, or that it's almost like, it's not just like a space where people can be heard and just witnessed, seen, held, but actually it always comes with some sort of, and this is like person to person, maybe more than the therapeutical space, but it's like, you notice it a lot. People start speaking up about certain things, and then we just want to help them, or friends just want to help their friends, but there's a lack of like understanding of what actually does help, what helps someone move through a hard time. It's not trying to get them to look on the bright side, or change it for them. It's like calling them in to like what is the root of this? We're always kind of operating on this symptom relief, and that's just a cultural thing. But I definitely see that.
Well, we sort of see men like some sort of monolithic blob, as if we're all the same and we're all going through the same thing. But like, as an example, one of the biggest at-risk groups to suicide in men are men working in construction, living in rural towns in their sort of 40s and 50s. Because what happens is that they work in construction their whole life, their back gives out, they can no longer work, they lose their work, they fall into debt, they've got a whole family to provide for, they can't, and then they'll turn to suicide. And like the male suicide rate in construction industry is terrifyingly high. I'm yet to see a single construction worker represented in a space like this.
And farming.
Farming's
exactly. Huge.
And that man who his back's given out, he's got disability now, he can't provide for his family. I wouldn't say he has a mental health problem. He has a financial problem and a work problem and a familial problem. And until we give that man the individual understanding, rather than seeing him as part of this big blob of men, I don't know how much we can stop male suicide.
Okay, so on that point, very valid point, I would come back and say, how is he relating to that situation? Because we've been, as humans, through a lot worse times. War. There's worse situations where you are so more at risk than, say, debt. But the stories we have behind that really shape the experience. So we band together if we're in war. We have a collective mission. We understand like what we need to do. But then so much is more at risk. And then you have like people that now are in like worse debt than ever. What does that say about their own individuality or their own kind of persona and how that looks in the society or culture? And I think that's the added weight of how we relate to that experience. It's like, oh, it's my fault I'm in debt. And it's a very I-centric way of that we can view life. If I'm not doing well career-wise, that means I'm not a good person. It's like the shame that we carry that you spoke to. And I think that because there's these situations, they're not like inherently, I'm just going to use the word bad. It does depend on how we relate to them, right? And I think that's another part of the conversation.
Yeah,
What do you think?
There's a holistic point of view where that man in construction will benefit for understanding his feelings more and being able to share them with his friends and family. I don't want to present the fact that if we can help his disability, he's fine, but giving men the tools to understand their feelings and share them is also another string to that bow. And also, in terms of you're right about men's value system, a lot of men's value is based on their ability to provide and protect their family and like the breadwinner. And that added pressure is obviously making it worse for that man. So simultaneously to greater understanding their own feelings and ability to communicate them, and also understanding his individual issues, greater disability support, retraining men in construction. Sorry, I forgot what I was saying now. What was I saying? Helping men find purpose and value outside of those breadwinner and provider roles, and finding purpose and value and meaning in life through like family and friends and hobbies and stuff like that is also going to help mitigate suicide too. I know there's been studies where they've basically asked women, where do you find meaning and happiness? And they've got many sources. They're like, my children, my family, my work, my home, hobbies, my friendship groups. And men really just have work and money. They only have really two sources of meaning. And when they lose those two sources of meaning, that's when suicide becomes a much greater risk. I always see it as like a puppet hanging from strings, and women have more strings to that puppet, all the ones I just mentioned. Men just have those two strings. And when they lose their job, they might retire or they have a disability. They cut, and that's it. And then they fall.
Yeah. So if we look at that and say the symptom suicide, what's the root cause? Maybe it is that we define our worth and value on productivity and money and esteem, social status. And without those things, when they fall away, suicide increases because of the following. So for me, I'm always trying to look at root causes of like, okay, maybe there is a real mismatch of how we're relating to life as men and what's happened throughout generations in that way of what's kind of coming to a head now, which is just so much chaos for men, really. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's so many different things that are part of this conversation. I absolutely agree with what you're saying and the different issues that I've brought up as well. There's no single cause of male suicide or male distress. I guess I'm trying to widen that conversation by adding as many new ideas as possible, whilst not erasing what's already been established, such as what you're talking about. But what I will categorically say is that male suicide is not caused by one single problem. be that toxic masculinity or male privilege or the patriarchy. Those are very low resolution points of view that basically put men back into that monolithic blob that doesn't see them as individuals deserving of sympathy, but sees them as some part of monolithic oppressor class.
We're back to the disposable nature.
It's back to the disposable thing. We see men as like these big... Like
we
big
do, and
robotic.
that's an evolutionary psychological trait, no? What do you think?
Well, we're talking specifically about like men's emotions, like crying. Like historically, for the vast majority of humankind, like crying was seen as a very masculine thing to do. Like it's...
Yeah, you go to other cultures and it's like holding hands, expressing,
but
like being...
It was only during like the Industrial Revolution where that stopped. Because men's emotions and men's tears were seen as getting in the way of their productivity. Like no one wants a man crying whilst he's in a factory making things. And that's when it stopped. It wasn't... This is a very relatively modern phenomenon of men not crying.
It would have either got you killed or lost your job.
Yeah.
Which is similar.
Yeah, so and then that's when I feel like the Industrial Revolution was when men became seen as like less human and more instruments of like productivity and capitalism.
That's a valid point, for sure.
And I'm not entirely against capitalism, but there's certainly ways in which it could do better. And stop seeing men as like these inhuman objects and start seeing them as human beings.
Mm-hmm. So what's your approach then, if you had to like bring it into, a few sentences? Approach to this stuff, like for someone who's just heard about you, listen to this conversation, which there will be many, because I think we have different audiences. But like, what's your approach to like bring this stuff to a head and like get more people to look at it and systemic change to happen? Like, what's that approach? Do you have like a framework you work within? It's obviously you do a lot of interviews. There's ways in which you are bringing all of this into kind of the stream.
I'll just remind yourself of this concept. Everyone keeps talking about men, like men do this, men are that, and I'm like, there is no men. They are only individual men. That's yourself and myself, and we're not the same. You and I are very different. We come from different backgrounds, we're different individuals, and the classical liberal in me fundamentally believes in seeing the individual first rather than a member of a group. Like, you're not a white man first, you're Chris, and Chris has his own set of experiences and difficulties and ideas and his own story that is far more important to who you are than the colour of your skin or your genitals. And although your group identity, being white and male, are important, they are not more important than your individual identity. So see the individual before the group, and same for me, same for everyone. And like, you're not a colour swatch and a chromosome, you're an individual with your own set of experiences. And that's where I feel like we start.
You're up against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got to start somewhere.
No, but that is like such counter when you articulate it in that way. It's such a counter to how we are the kind of the fabric of our culture.
This discourse is very much tribal now. We're not a bunch of individuals of different points of view. We're tribes, and we're at war, and we're just othering the other, and it's just beating the other side at any cost. And also about like constantly demanding more and more purity from your own side. And if you don't agree with every single point of view,
purity, I love that.
If you don't agree with everything I say, you're out. You're cut. And I was like, I'm part of that. I'm a leper as well. I've been cast out of friendship groups and my political groups. I left the Labour Party, for example.
Okay, and so that was your background.
Yeah, I was a member of the Labour Party, and very, very liberal and left wing and progressive. I've only ever voted Labour and Green Party once, and I don't know who I'm going to vote for this time. And castigated out for having a set of opinions that are slightly different, and different only in the sense that they extend my compassion from women to men too. Like, I don't know why I'm the one that's in the wrong when I hold all the same beliefs for women. I'm pro-choice, I support women's rights, but I also want to talk about men. Like, it's not either or, it is both. And I just don't understand why people can't get on board with that and to see men as fundamental human beings.
But in this moment, can you, if you lent into what was true for them, and what causes a person to label you as wrong because it counters what they're saying? What type of person does that?
A sort of person that identifies as their political beliefs. Like, I am an X or Y, and these are my political beliefs.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask, like, why do a lot of feminists have a problem with what I've got to say? And it's probably because they've built their whole identity and not just identity.
Threatens their identity.
Threatens identity, even their friendship groups, even their jobs. I know people, friends of mine, that would lose their job if they adopted to my own beliefs.
It's the same COVID situation. It's the same kind of mentality.
And it's once you've built your whole life, your groups, your community, your work, your lifestyle around a set of political beliefs that are subject to change, when they do change and they're no longer correct or less correct than they were, you have a very difficult situation, identity crisis, where you sort of have to change your skin. It's like you can't change your skin. You've like literally bought the t-shirt and you've been wearing it around town, and now that t-shirt kind of looks a little bit inaccurate. It's a bit like, I'm a bit of a football fan.
Have you ever done that? Yeah, I was going to say, have you ever done that? Have you ever, football is a great example, right? Have you ever done that when you've labelled someone as wrong for their opinion?
On football?
It could be in football, because they might have a side.
Have I labelled someone as wrong?
But do you know what I mean? Because this, let's take the Labour Party and then that castration you talked about of like people saying you're wrong, please leave, to simplify it. But the people that were doing that, because it threatened their identity. Like, have you ever done that to someone?
What, castigated someone from my own group?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about people like Richard Reeves, but I think I've articulated a fairly good enough reason for why I find myself a little bit separated from him now. And there's loads of people I disagree with, but none of them are based on their gender or their race or anything like that. They're based on the political ideas they hold. And although I might castigate them, I'm still more than happy to sit down. If Richard was to call me now, I'd answer, well, I'd have to wait for this to finish, but I'd absolutely talk to him. There's loads of people I would talk to. Don't think I'd ever castigate someone completely unless they really did hold horrible views, just because they disagreed with me. In fact, I'd want to speak to them the most. But the sad thing is, the people that do disagree with me and who I have asked to sit down in that very seat, they don't want to do it. So their DMs are full of invites for me, and none of them have been accepted. But I like to think I would talk to anyone. Like right now, it's very difficult with the Israel-Palestine thing, and to be honest, I have people on both sides telling me different stories, and I haven't ended any friendships.
Who would you love to get in this seat, like have an interview with, that you disagree
Stephen
with?
Fry. Only because he's my all-time hero, and he's a bit like me. He looks like a lost lefty liberal himself. He's a bit like, no one could ever question his love of humankind or his intelligence, but he seems to be a little bit cast out. I saw a debate not long ago with him about political correctness, and he was arguing that political correctness has gone too far, and he was stood side by side with Jordan Peterson, so it's both of them, and I'm like, those are not natural bedfellows, but somehow Stephen Fry has ended up arguing with someone that is like Jordan Peterson, and I think that's because he's been cast out, and he holds opinions that are slightly different to the status quo on the left. I don't even think it's necessarily the status quo. I think it's just a very loud minority of sort of very authoritarian bullies that are demanding greater and greater levels of purity. And I'd love to talk to Stephen Fry. Wonderful man.
I see it as like the root of it being trauma, and the symptom then being, I don't have capacity to entertain your ideas. This is how I think. This is why I think it. And I haven't even got room to sit in the room with you. This is a one-way street kind of. And that's the extreme point of view. It's extreme right, can be extreme left. And it's like, it's really good for me to kind of lean into this, because it's not something I think about much, but that's how I kind of see it, is like, it's extremes. And can you ever communicate with that? Can you ever, like, what have you seen that's worked in that arena of like when you have changed someone's mind?
I think just managing your own expectations. Like, no one's going to change their mind in the
managing your
I don't think I'm going to sit down and change your mind in any sort of fundamental way right now.
But what have you seen that has just worked in terms of you've got someone to see the humanity in the situation? Because you're fighting. I don't want to label what you're doing, but it seems like you're speaking to a very crucial, important topic about let's see the humanity at play, past right and wrong, past whatever judgments we've got of how people should or shouldn't be treated based on their gender, their sexuality, or whatever it might be, and let's just come together. That's the message I'm hearing. which I'm on board.
Mm.
But it's also, you're trying to communicate to people who just don't seem to have the capacity for those ideas of like, no, but they did this, although, and it's very like, it's just very extreme.
If I'm having like a debate with someone, I would, like I said, I wouldn't expect to win that debate, and they're not suddenly like, you know what, you've changed your mind. But maybe the next day in the shower they'll think about it, and maybe the day after that they'll walk in the park and they'll think about it more. It's that drip process where you're slowly changing someone's mind over a long period of time,
moving the needle
to the point where suddenly they're like, actually, well, how the hell have I ended up here? Like, I've absolutely changed my mind from 5 years ago to now, and it didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process. So,
what did you change your mind about?
Labour Party and the left. I mean, I don't even consider myself left now. I'm more like left-leaning, moderate, centrist.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish more people would join me in the centre. Like, in terms
join
of
me in the centre.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of being a moderate, I don't think you can be too moderate. Like, that's the great thing about, you can be too left, you can be too right, but I don't know if you can be too moderate, and that's why it's so effective. So I would manage my own expectations and be like, I'm not going to change this person's mind immediately in a very big way. And the second thing I do, and this is like a strange analogy, but I learned this when I was playing a game called Medieval Total War 2 when I was a child. And that's basically an army game. You've got two militaries battling it. You've got the French versus the English. And I realised that if I surrounded the other army and absolutely decimated them, they would fight to the last man and kill everyone. But if I gave them a chance to get out, to retreat, they often would. So in the same way that if I'm debating someone, I don't want to completely dominate them and be like, I beat you, I've slayed you. I want to give them a chance to get away and to back out and to escape and be like, you know what, yeah, I wouldn't just keep going in on them. And you see those conversations on Twitter and Instagram, they just go on and on and on. And it's like, make your point, allow them a bit of space to retreat, make it again, and then it's over. If they haven't changed, if nothing has come from those exchanges, then let it go. Like, it's, if you can't change someone's mind in like a 3-part conversation, you won't change in 10 or 20.
Yeah, I often think the energy is actually proving to yourself that you are right, rather than trying to contribute to the conversation or to their well-being.
Right. Or not to see it in such an antagonistic point of view where it's me versus you. It's you and I versus the problem, which is something else entirely. You and I are not like enemies. We work together to solve something else.
Yeah.
And once you can see people that way, you're making friends of enemies. I feel like that will help too. And like I said, don't just try and absolutely squash them in a debate, because they will never give up. They'll dig their heels in, and give them a bit of good faith to step back and maintain a bit of dignity, and to admit they're wrong in a small way and then leave. You don't have to like crush them. Mm-hmm. That's just something I've learned in many battles, both on Instagram and in Medieval Total War 2. It's a great game.
I think we are conditioned in these ways though, around fighting, and as kids and as men, and as society of like teams and red and blue, and just like even growing up and watching movies, watching good and bad, and like humans against humans.
Yeah, and it is like, well, going back to the football, like I support Leicester City Football Club. That's where I was born, and that's been an emotional roller coaster for me the last 10 years. We've won the Premier League, we've been down to League One, and we've come back up again. And I will support that team through thick and thin, no matter what they do or how much they fail. And that's just my lord. That's just how football works. It's like that, again, that tribal mentality. And it's not a big deal, it's a sport. But people adopt that same mentality in politics, where it's not about listening to the other side, it's just about defeating them at any cost and supporting your team at any cost. Whereas people need to be like, actually, I don't agree. I'm going to vote with my feet. I'm going to leave the Labour Party or leave the Conservative Party. Yeah. I'm going to change side or go to the middle. I'm going to spoil my ballot. I'm going to tell my politician I don't agree with you anymore. This is what I want. It's not. You don't have to constantly stick to your own side in politics. That you need to give yourself a bit of flexibility to change your mind, and that you do that by not, as we said, identifying as your political beliefs. Because once you've identified as your political beliefs, especially in public, very difficult to change them.
Well, we identify with so much: the clothes we wear, the names we're given, the job titles, and that to me, again, it's like what. That's the kind of a spiritual crisis that we're in. It's like we are so wrapped up, head-led, ego-driven, of like identifying and attaching to these things, these labels, to create a sense of safety, but also worth. And it's like that's the larger thing that I'm often speaking to around these points, because it's like, can we just put that to a side for a moment and know that you're not your name, you're not your team.
Well, but how do you feel like being a newcomer, I assume, to this particular, the more political side of Men and Boys?
I wouldn't say I'm in the political side of Men.
Well, but as in like
maybe now
as
associated with you.
When newcomers is in the very immediate recent, like now. Like, how do you feel? Because a lot of people, like, it hurt, like they prickle. They're like, oh, this makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the space for years, and to me, I just don't understand why people find it controversial. But I would love this chance, if I can ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why would, as someone that's new or just learning these things, why do you personally find, or do you find it uncomfortable? How do you feel about it?
Uncomfortable. I don't think they're uncomfortable for me. I'm just like, have I got the energy to give to something that I feel isn't going to be effective? You know?
So what is in that?
I like the energy towards the political system, towards. I just fundamentally don't believe that contributing to a system that is, in my mind, like just not sustainable and it is going to die of something. Like, I'm kind of grieving it, if anything. I'm stepping away from that ilk of my life to then like come away and just create something new, rather than contributing to the conversation, because I just don't think it's effective. And even if it moves the needle slightly, I think we still exist in a system that is perpetually like unhealthy. Our culture, I don't really say capitalism a lot, but it's like linear growth, things like that. Like that, I'm just like, well, what are we actually? We all want to move in some sort of direction, but what is it we're contributing to? That's why I'd never go out and just get a job. It's like I've like detached from that side of things, and I don't know. This is what I'm just.
It's rare for me to meet someone more skeptical than I am, but you've gone and done it. Bloody hell! So, you just want an entire systemic change?
It's not even that I'm like rooting for anarchy. I don't think that, although it can work, kind of self-governing. But yeah, I'm not like up against it, and I don't feel like I'm trying to fight or save the world because I'm mad at it. I'm spending time saving the world because I love it. Not that I'm thinking saving the world's anything to do with me. I think we are also custodians, stewards for this time on Earth, and look after your plot. It's like look after your plot in a couple of miles and then come back to community. And this is what it's gone on a bit of a. I'm sure if we met 4 or 5 years ago, you know, I'd have said a lot of different things. But now I'm like focused on how can I create an environment and people are attracted to that, and then that's what's helped me. I created a men's foundation called Men of Earth, and I just created it because I wanted to be a part of it. I was like, create something that you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And it was just meeting, it was coming back to the fire, coming back to the elements of spending time doing things that are going to benefit us and like and be more healthy. And then part of that was like conversations, and it's just us taking responsibility, it's being in integrity, it's like getting radically honest and just really like understanding that we haven't all got it figured out, and then how can we use each other for support, accountability. And then I still feel like even if I was participating in the mainstream, everyone's still trying to do it alone to some extent. And I'm like, it's like the models that we have, money, the model of money, like how we earn and have a certain place value on certain areas of life, of like rent. And I live in a van.
Wow.
I live in a van.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, it's outside, I'll show you. But like that's what I've dedicated this section of my life to, of like, so I can, because it's fucking hard to live. I was talking about this last conversation about getting your needs met. It's like, yeah, you have to work quite a lot. But I've actually making a decision to do something that I don't have to work as much, so I can spend time having these sorts of conversations and doing certain things that are then gonna, I'm just places like what we value and then prioritizing certain things.
You said, I mean, you represent a point of view that, in the way I mentioned earlier, I am changing my mind towards someone, what you're saying, in favour of that. You said you're not saving the world, and I mean, I would argue that in some ways you are. There's a really famous quote where a professor was talking to his students in class on their first day at university, and he said, you're all here because you want to change the world, and that's okay, but I want you to know that it's okay if you just change the world for one person, and it's okay if that person is you. And I was just like, that's such a beautiful lesson to teach students, because everyone wants to change the world. Everyone's like, oh, how did you look, everything's on fire, everything's heating up, everyone's done. It is the constant anarchy you're talking about. Like, people do want to do something, but it is important to remind everyone that you don't have to save everyone. You can just save yourself. And if everyone did that, then the world would be saved. And I guess what I'm talking about is everyone talks about this top-down point of view of helping men and boys in this context. And that's why I'm changing my mind, because I was always like, I want a minister for men. I want men's health funded. I want research done. I want a fundamental change in the way we look at abuse on the police. I want to throw out the Duluth model, like actual systemic change, which I still do want. But I'm also growing more aware and in support of the ground up. So like people such as yourself and myself and others like us doing the work on the ground without any political support, without any funding, without any sort of legislative change or help from Westminster. And just doing small things on the grassroots level, even like not even necessarily setting up a group, like small things where anyone watching this podcast, when it's over, you call up a friend, male or female, and just be like, how you doing? What's up? Let's go for a drink, let's hang out.
Yeah.
Or even just chatting to them. Like those are small changes that collectively will change the world. And I am changing my mind, swinging more towards that, like only because I fundamentally agree with that, but also just, I think politicians don't care. And if we're waiting for them to change, we'll be waiting for the rest of our lives. And you don't have to wait to pick up the phone and go see your mate and ask them how you're doing. And it's free. It's free.
Most things that are going to work are, right? Well, rather than even just think of like parenting, outsourcing our parenting so we can work to pay for it. And it's like that in itself is something to look at. It's like, okay, let's have a realistic, rational approach to how we're raising the people that we care about the most. I don't have kids, but that to me makes more sense of like actually raising them myself rather than outsourcing to the people that don't have as much capacity for them. And like just that, even that, it's just like, okay, maybe that's, we're doing that a little too much,
Yeah, well, I'm a country bumpkin. I grew up in the countryside and I loved it. Like, in Leicestershire. So just roaming the wilderness, my parents let me out and I wouldn't come back and I'd be stuck in, there were no phones back then. And I'll just be in a tree somewhere building a den or like whittling. But now it's like I'm in Southeast London, very different. And I'm so grateful that I had that childhood amongst the wilderness without a phone, without a laptop, without, Instagram, Twitter, and didn't even exist. And I feel like I have no idea how much they contribute to who I am now, but I am confident they contribute a lot to who I am. And I don't have children either, but when I do, I would want to replicate that. I wouldn't want to raise them in London. I'd want to raise it sort of close to where I grew up in the wilderness.
Absolutely.
So that is what life's about. That is what we're used to as human beings. We spent 100,000 millions of years growing up in that, and now it's only very, very, very recently that we've brought these huge cities and all the Starbucks and McDonald's that come with it. It's not what we're used to. And I mean, I try to stray away from the spiritual thing because it's very abstract and woolly and not really the sort of thing I'm...
Oh, let's dive in.
I mean, I just think all right. But
what does it mean? Yeah, what does it mean? What's your aversion to, like, I guess the word even, right?
Spirituality.
Yeah, like, because it shows it so differently for so many different people. What have you had experiences of that perhaps didn't feel right or resonate or were like way too much?
I would consider myself spiritual, not in a practicing way, but in a way that is very aware that as a human being, there's only a very, very small wedge of the universe around me that I can even begin to comprehend. And people like... I'm agnostic religiously. I don't believe in any religion, but nor am I an atheist where I must rule out altogether.
Like you just don't.
Like both of them are equally arrogant, in my opinion. Atheists just seem to lack imagination. And I don't know what's out there. And I recognise that. And I also don't think you know, or anyone knows. And I feel like being agnostic is to accept that. I don't think there's some guy in a cloud making women out of like a spare rib of a man and shaping the world with his bare hand. That to me is a crazy idea. But I also acknowledge that the vast, vast, vast majority of the universe, we have no idea what's going on. And there are planes of thinking that we just cannot comprehend. Like when my dog watches a TV set, Like that, she does not understand what's going on. She sees, oh, it's a cow, but she doesn't understand it's just a TV and there's a whole world around her. And like in the same way that who knows what we don't see, we don't know what we don't know, and like there is no reason why similar levels of understanding reality cannot exist above us in the same way that they exist above my dog.
Have you seen The Egg on YouTube?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna send it
Tell
to
me
you.
about it.
It's phenomenal, and it's like I love thought experimenting of like what this could be, or open to the ideas that you are me living a different experience, and like that makes sense to me. Why don't I just entertain that for the day and be like, everyone I meet is kind of an extension of me, just living a very different experience. But The Egg itself says this. I don't know. I'll just ruin it for everyone. But pause, go watch. It's the egg is this planet, and it's for you, and it's you constantly reincarnating into all these different people all over the world, and it's just like a schoolroom. It's like a learning thing for you just to constantly experience. And why can't that be true? It's like maybe it is. But I don't think we're also supposed to know. It's like if we did, like I just don't think it's meant to be that way. Whatever it is. But I think this is the thing to think about. It's like comprehending your own death, or like bringing that into the conversation of the death of you. Like, what does that mean? In our culture, we're very afraid of it. We don't have time for it. We don't speak about it a lot. Like, it's just not a part of the conversation that we're all going to die. And what does that mean for us? How does that inform our place that we live from? Like in politics, or like, you just never hear this. You just never hear it, and we don't really consider how to exit or really how to enter this existence. But they are the important sacred points of our life, right? How we come into the world and how we leave. And I've never really had any reference of both. We're not around it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this little safe bubble that we live in our culture, that we just put these things to the kind of behind the doors that we don't look at. And I think that does a disservice to how we live life. And having a connection with death, like being around people who are transitioning, whatever you want to think of is happening, because we don't know, is then going to allow us to just be like, oh, fuck, that's going to happen to me. And that's going to like maybe allow me to just drop into, okay, I don't have it figured out because I don't know what happens to this person. And it's just like bringing us back to that, really, which is how we have existed around these things.
Yeah. It's just, I've spent like, it's been 13.5 billion years of the universe before I was born, and there's going to be many billions.
Didn't suffer the slight bit of inconvenience.
Yeah, and I don't remember any of it. So if anything, like that's just the norm. Me not being here, and I don't know what exists on either side of the small tiny fraction of time I spend on this universe. I don't know what exists on either side of that. But that's why I just struggle to have these conversations, because I want to have like concrete discussions, just because that's who I am. Otherwise I just get lost in the weeds and in very subjective woolly talk. But my only fundamental belief is that I don't think anyone knows. So I'm very skeptical of anyone that claims to have any sort of answer within the realm of spirituality and life. Yeah. And unless that response is I don't know.
So what about when people say my guides are telling me? What happens then?
What guides?
I don't know.
I don't know what you're on about.
If it works for you.
Yeah,
but I'd like to stay on the spiritual kind of, like what's happening in that space, because there's a psychedelic renaissance, and then there's this new age spirituality, we call it. We label it that, but it's different for different people, because religion, we've kind of thrown it out. What now? Like, how are people making sense of this existence? And a lot of people are, what I'm saying, leaning into, like having altered states of consciousness and then connecting to other things that help them make sense of their lives. So how has that been for you? Like, have you experienced like any altered states of consciousness, or I don't know if you want to go there in this conversation, but because that can be a spiritual, like psychedelics way in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could be breath work. It could be meditation.
I've never done breath work. I know nothing about it, but I'm also very skeptical. Although I'm also aware that I don't know what I'm talking about, so maybe I'm missing out on something great. But I don't. Yeah.
How it can. I've seen it really benefit, and it's benefited myself. I don't think I've really gone there too deep with breath work, but it's benefited me and helped me understand why I am the way I am in a way that's given me distance between. It's what meditation is, the analogy of like, it just gives you a bit of distance to who you are. Essentially, you're allowed to just like see the whole thing, see patterns, especially with psychedelics, mushrooms, and doing it in a certain way that's very intentional, that it can shut down certain parts of my brain to allow me access to, you know, previous things. And as a man, my head's very busy, and I often overthink. Even when I'm in a situation where I'm meditating or I'm having an experience, I'll often think about, oh, is this a spiritual experience? Or my head will be chatting.
Yeah, no, I mean...
So, yeah, psychedelics have helped me distance that, so I can just allow my body to just fully let go. And
I mean, there's a lot of utility to psychedelics in terms of exploration, but although I recognise how powerful they are and how healing they can be for a lot of people, I also do think they're just still existing inside your brain. I feel like my dad is a neuroscientist, and like he I guess maybe I'm speaking his words, but everything being explained in this, it doesn't, just because you're seeing something profound doesn't necessarily mean it actually exists outside your brain.
Sure, I'd agree.
Like everything I'm seeing right now is in my brain, so there's no reason why it can't be more. I think people fundamentally misunderstand the brain. People say, oh, you only ever use 10% of your brain, and although that's true, we use all of it at different times. You just don't use all of it at the same time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your head would explode.
Do you not think we could have a different sense of the reality that we exist in? Because we only perceive what we can, yet we know through science that there are more things going on that we can perceive.
Yeah, I do, but I find it difficult to talk about things I can't measure or experience or can't be quantified in through various different metrics. And although I can understand there certainly are things we can't comprehend, but the fact that we can't comprehend them, it's like it's very difficult to talk about them because we don't know. We're so subjective. I don't know what you're talking about, and like, if anything, it's frustrating when those things get into politics because they're very ideological, and like in politics we need to look at evidence rather than sort of ideological theories and dogma. So I very much want to keep them separate.
But I think it's all perception. Evidence can be perceived one way and not perceived another based on your beliefs. You sure have had that before. You've shown someone the data and they perceive it in a way that is like different for them. It's different for you and how you're reading it.
Yeah.
I think that has a place. And I know science is what we know now. Evidence is like based on this study. But then there's so many variables in those things, how people perceive things, and then many other things, that I think it's important. Don't get me wrong. It's not to say that I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I think to not have conversations about the things that we can't measure, we don't know what that's going to make way for. You know, not to be open. I don't know, you've not said you're not open to like those ideas. I suppose you are, but you're more rooted in what you do. Can measure.
Yeah, and I mean, another reason why I've gravitated towards things that you can measure is just I feel like there are few people having those discussions in the area of men's work, as you'd call it. And
yeah.
I'm thankful that there are lots of people that are talking about breath work and meditation, and I recognise they are very helpful. But I've chosen to talk more about the objective reality of what's happening around us that you can measure in terms of like numbers of, you know, male suicides and men who are abused or addicted to drugs or incarcerated, just because no one's doing that. And I'm like, that's where I'll go. And I'm just not the right. I mean, although I respect your area of discussion, it's just not naturally what I fit into.
That's
and
fair.
I'm a bit of an antagonist, so I want to go where I'm needed and where my skills are more relevant. And I find that's in the area of tangible political sort of outcomes and that sort of thing. I would just get lost. It's just, I guess I was raised by two scientists and very critical, and like Oh my God, yeah, they would love to talk to you. Yeah. And I'm there, unless they can see or hear it, they don't want to know. Very pragmatic, very sensible. And I feel like that.
Is that sensible though? Unless you can see it or you can hear it. Because I think what's more sensible is to know that when you split an atom and then move it away from each other, you change something over here and it changed the same atom. And it's like, whoa, what's going on there? I can't see or hear that change, but I know it's happening. It's like when you change the way you look at something, the thing you look at changes. You heard that before?
Yeah, well, quantum tunneling and quantum mechanics.
So like Rupert Sheldrake stuff, and I think it's fascinating.
We're starting to understand quantum tunneling, and it's not like it's a complete black box, or it was, and we're understanding it.
But it was at one point.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was lots of things we didn't understand. I didn't understand why the sky was blue or why the Earth rotated.
It's not.
We didn't know why the sun came up and went down. And that is where religion came from, God of the gaps. And we created gods to help us understand things we don't know and are afraid of.
Yeah.
And I wonder how spirituality and these things could potentially.
I think science is catching up.
Yeah.
Personally, catching up to what Eastern wisdom and many parts of the world, like breathing practice, has been a part of, which we considered maybe 5 years ago to be absolute bollocks. But now, studies and CO2 and intolerance and nitric oxide, breathing through your nose, like things like that. Well, ancient traditions knew that breathing through your nose was fundamentally a healthy thing. We probably like poo-pooed that a long time, not long ago. But yeah, maybe I'd love to ask you, just to kind of ground us, maybe what works for you, and like in terms of your health, in your day to day. Like, what things do you what your habits, what your things that you have and to hold. Like,
well, I've definitely struggled with a lot of the physical symptoms of anxiety, less so now, and a lot of managing that came through breath work, like learning to breathe properly and how to breathing through your nose. And I have found that very helpful, but it only ever helped me manage the symptoms of the deeper problems that I was going through and experiences that were causing anxiety. And also, it was helped simultaneously by understanding what anxiety is from a scientific evolutionary point of view, and understanding it's basically my body in fear, wanting to run away or fight or flight and that sort of stuff. And then the depression that comes after anxiety is basically you're accepting the fate of the bear or whatever's coming around the corner.
It can be a healthy reaction to a situation, environment that's not serving you.
Well, I mean, I'm very much a believer of there are no abnormal behaviours, only a normal response to an abnormal set of experiences.
I like that.
So if someone seems to be acting abnormally, you can look at it that way, but you could also see that they're acting in a very normal way, considering what they've been through. Like someone that is a victim of trauma is going to respond in a normal way, considering that context, in a way that to your eye who hasn't seen that seems abnormal, but there are no abnormal experiences. Only normal.
So responses. You have compassion to pretty much
right, and that's that's
really a question. Like for those people who just cannot accept the point of view that you've got, like how do you relate to them?
Well, it's a bit. To put it into an example, people look at things like violent fantasies. A lot of men have violent fantasies. People see that as like a toxic thing, a dangerous thing, to be vilified and to be we don't want to hear about us. Like, they're dangerous. But the research into violent fantasies finds that they are often a response to bullying in school. So they looked at boys who are bullied, and they found that 97% of the most bullied boys in school went on to have violent fantasies. So more or less all of them.
That explains a lot.
And it was more. It was like they hypothesized that violent fantasies of men were basically them a coping mechanism for them to deal with violence to come. So as a boy, they were being bullied so relentlessly that their brain came up with the coping mechanism of violent fantasies as a means of dealing with violence. They're expecting it to come, so they're fantasizing about it, and they just never got rid of it. And suddenly, if you look at men who have violent fantasies in the context of a bullied boy, you have a lot more compassion for them. And suddenly, that violent fantasy is no longer an abnormal behavior. It's just a normal response to an abnormal set of experiences. And like going back to your question about how do we help men, or what do we do, it's like don't see men as some sort of static object. Even men we don't like who do bad things, see them as having that they are the response and the product of what they've been through. Like they don't just arrive here. You have no idea what that person's been through, what they've experienced, and we don't have as much of a problem having that view set of women, which I agree with. That if a woman commits a crime, like even a horrific crime, we ask that, what has she been through? Is she a victim in her own right? Has she experienced trauma? And often she has, because violence is cyclical in that way. But we struggle to extend that to men, and you'll see it in the news. Like a woman who might kill a child, we'll see her as struggling with something, or maybe she's in debt, or maybe she's being abused. Maybe we don't know.
But does that make sense in context?
In context of what?
So the fact that we don't have the same perspective, if that happened to men, we have very different biases and proclivities towards certain things, like you just illuminated. But that makes sense in context, right? It must do. That the fact that we don't have so much compassion for men.
I think.
But what's that? Do you think? Have you arrived at like understanding of what in the psychological or the collective shadow, which exists, is collective unconscious? We all kind of tap into in whatever way you can measure or not, of like our perspective on why we don't have the same view on a man committing a crime as a woman.
Well, I think it's a matter of like agency. Like we give men more agency than they're capable, and we don't give women enough. So as men, we're held responsible for crimes of other men that we have no role in and could never have stopped. Like we're given more agency than we should have, whereas women aren't often giving enough. So you're talking about hyper agency, and it's very interesting how we seem to think women are incapable of things in their own right. We don't think a woman can come up with do things that are heinous or criminal or violent unless she is being brainwashed or controlled by someone else. And that is certainly a worthwhile point of view. But we don't also consider that maybe she's just an autonomous woman doing poor things as well. In the same way that we go the opposite for men, we seem to think he's in control of absolutely everything, not just his own behaviours, but those of others like him. And we don't see him as in a similar way in agency, and we don't afford him the same understanding and sort of background and stuff like that. But I mean a lot of that is sort of maybe a hangover from like a very systemically sexist view of men and women, where women are seen as like, you know, kind, like nurturing motherly figures, and you know, damsels in distress, and very fragile and incapable, which is not true. That's just one part of women, and we struggle to see women as being agents of their own behaviour and as being autonomous. Ironically, a lot of people who stand for women's autonomy never seem to extend that autonomy to women that do bad things. Suddenly they've got no autonomy, and then for men it's the opposite. But it's like people talk about benevolent sexism, where we see women as like saints and never the devil. And I remember Warren Farrell put it as, we only ever ask if God could be a woman, but never ask if the devil could be a woman. And I think that's so interesting. And like, why do we not? If you are a true advocate of women's autonomy, that autonomy is surely the entire gamut of human behaviour, both good and bad.
I could see so many people not liking that.
Wow,
it just triggers people, doesn't it?
But
it just triggers the hell out.
Well, that is Margaret Atwood saying that, who is like a renowned feminist.
That's a woman.
Yeah, and one of the world's most famous feminists, and she said, fundamentally, I think women are human beings.
Don't you just love it when you meet a woman who's just like does that, who's just like
really
in her power, that actually doesn't just like fight for women, she actually fights for actual equality. Which is both.
Margaret Atwood's one of many women.
Yeah, I've heard
and she said, fundamentally, I think women are human beings capable of both saintly and criminal behaviour.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, because you're just rooted in reality.
Yeah, it doesn't make you any better.
You're not
or
a
worse.
Wounded individual who's trying to get their point.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that incapable of wrongdoing, and it doesn't mean men aren't incapable of like doing great things. And like the fact is, you're just a human. You're a human as human as a man, and as capable of both good and bad as a man. Like, yeah, a woman can be a CEO and be a political leader and do anything a man can do, but that also includes the bad things that men do too. And anything less than that is not real autonomy. It's not true autonomy unless it's autonomy to do bad or to choose things that you don't like.
Yeah,
I don't know why that's a controversial thing.
I know.
That's just me practicing the true definition of autonomy, but I don't get to choose what men do.
Do you think it's the same as saying all lives matter?
No. No.
To some people. Do you
Only
think people
that
see it in that way? Like, you know, because of the hundreds, thousands of years of just like degradation of a certain type of person, type of human, whether it's race or sex, because of the history and the baggage of that and the weight we feel maybe towards racism and like what we have to make space for, and constantly it's like, you know, it leans too far one way and we get that. It's like the pendulum swing. But like when you say, when someone says, well, all lives matter, it's not just about black people, but it's like when you're fighting back for men and seeing that, to people,
there's so many things wrong with that. I mean, the first is that a very lopsided view of history, and there are certainly many awful things that have happened to women throughout history at the hands of men, but so too there are awful things happen to men too. Like, it's not, if you were to go back in time 100 years and be like, well, do I want to go to war and have my legs blown off, or do I want to be sort of suppressed and turned into sort of a baby making machine? Like, what would you want, life of a man or woman? Like, do you want to be stuffed into a mine shaft to die, or do you want to sort of have several children and raise and educate themselves? And like, if you think I would rather pick the man, you do not understand history well enough. And I don't think, people seem to think that men throughout history were walking around, you know, CEOs of their own company, counting money the whole time. And although those people had existed, the vast majority of men were just as immiserated as women were. So that's why I would start to disagree with you. And the second point of view is that another asymmetry that's drawn is that what you're saying is that...
I'm not saying this.
Well,
I'm putting this as a counter. I'm not saying I agree.
I hear it often. But people draw a line of equivalence between advocating for men and advocating for white people, for example, such as all lives matter. And that's not the same. Like, there, as a white person, I'm happy to say more or less advantage in every single possible way you could think of, apart from suicide, interestingly. But being white is a massive advantage in society still. But being a man is not across the board. There are advantages and disadvantages. So it's a fundamentally unfair comparison. And also, ironically, people don't understand that the vast majority of people that are killed by police in the context of all lives matter are men. If you were to line up 100 black Americans killed by police, 99 of those people will be men, black men. Like, black men are like 100 times more likely to be killed by police than a black woman. So not only is all lives matter fundamentally ignorant, but it's also misrepresenting my argument. And unless you're willing to see Black Lives Matter in the context of both gender and race, I would say your advocacy is ineffective, and that police brutality is a massive racial and gendered issue. Like, men as a group are 20 times more likely to be killed by police. Black people are about 3.5 times more likely to be killed by police. And unless you're willing to look through both those lenses in an intersectional way, I would argue that you're not doing enough. And this all lives matter thing is not good enough. And like, the fact is, the lens I'm putting in front of men's issues helps things like police brutality, because it helps us understand why are so many black men being killed? Why is it specifically men that are being killed? And it's because people fear men. And ironically, the people on the left that are, you know, banging the drum, trying to fearmonger around men, trying to create this cultural fear around the men on the street, I'm like, they have yet to realise that the people that are going to pay the price of that fearmongering the most will be black men, and they are probably contributing to the very problem that they claim to want to solve. Yeah, because they're creating a fear and a panic. And if that fear and panic is felt by a police officer with a gun, suddenly that's when they start shooting black men. Yeah, and this idea of moral panic around men is feeding into, in my opinion, the very problem of police brutality. So I would love to meet that person, and I reckon I could change their mind, but yeah, no, I'm sure you can. It's not the same. It's not the same. People say, "Oh, well, if we can have." But my question was, do you think that is in the way? Yeah. People have that clearly. People have that perspective. Yeah. And I was just like, it was in the UK at least. I didn't really see. I was on the BLM marches. I was there, and I didn't really see many people talking about it within the context of race and gender. And I would say gender is as important, perhaps even more important, to understanding what particularity is. I don't hear many people talk about these points, really. I know I said at the start, like, I see a lot of people following you, but as directly as referencing it to all other areas of inequality or you know. Well, another one is like another issue. Obviously, people talk about gay rights a lot, but people don't talk about the unique experiences of gay men. So then that's what I mean. I'm taking the gay rights lens and I'm putting the male lens in front of it to look at it of what the experiences of gay men. And if you start to look through that lens, you start to understand that gay men have had a very different experience to gay women. Firstly, in the sense that today, gay men are less accepted than gay women in every single country in the world. And also, historically, it was uniquely gay men that were persecuted. Everyone talks about the persecution of gay people in the UK, and gay people were persecuted, locked up, sentenced to hard labour and castrated. But it was gay men, not gay women. The same in the Nazi Party, obviously, in the Holocaust, a lot of gay people were killed, but again, it was gay men. It wasn't gay women. Being a lesbian wasn't accepted by any means, but it was not punished through concentration camps. And I think there's the added benefit of seeing homophobia against gay men as a product of misandry as well, like an anti-male bias that sees men as inherently guilty, and therefore we see gay men as guilty of being gay in the same way as we see black men as the same guilt. And I just think I am increasing the resolution of these discussions, and I am, if anything, the person that's sort of fogging the situation are the people saying all lives matter, or you sound like all lives matter. I'm actually giving you a better point of view than you're capable of seeing. And if you had a bit more guts about it, obviously the hypothetical person, but if you had a bit more guts to actually see things in the way I see them, perhaps you might learn something. But that is beyond too many people. Too many people are like, oh, International Men's Day, what's next? Is it going to be International White People Day or International Straight Person Day? I'm like, absolutely not. I do not want straight pride. I do not want to have International White People Day or International Able-Bodied Day, but I would like International Men's Day to be recognised, because it's not the same. It's not, you're comparing two different things there.
Yeah, well said, brother. Increase in the resolution. I like that.
Yeah, like high definition discussion.
Yeah, it's hard though, right? Because this is such a significant... I think it's hard to see for people. It's really hard to see.
The interesting way I saw it is that in the aftermath of Sarah Everard being killed in the UK, which is a horrific crime, there was a big campaign to help men behave in a way that would help women feel safe. So sort of crossing the road, or don't go and talk to women you don't know. One of them is to take your hood down, not to wear hoodies and take your hands out your pockets. So hood down. That was a massive campaign by Ogilvy and Women's Aid. And I thought that was incredible, because when Trayvon Martin was killed by the racist George Zimmerman in America, gunned down for nothing, he was wearing a hoodie too. Trayvon Martin, a young black boy killed for no reason whatsoever apart from being black and wearing a hoodie. And the same campaign happened where young black men are told not to wear hoodies and to take the hoodie down. And that triggered the Million Hoodie March, where black people across America were rightly outraged, and they marched and they were like, this isn't the fact that he was wearing a hoodie, it's because he was black. And it's interesting that we see men with that same guilt, where we sort of tell them to take the hood down. And the hood down campaign for men and the hood down campaign for Trayvon Martin was an interesting parallel, very stark. And I was like, I don't know why people can't see those things as sort of related too.
Sure.
Like the idea of men being inherently scary.
The one thing I do push back on is when, not that situation, but when there's a point which, this for example, if you said, well, if that happened to women, we wouldn't be okay with it. And I think that's such a simplistic way to look at it. Yes, it heightens the thing you're talking about. It kind of, the resolution increases, because it does. It's like, okay, why is that? Why do we have this bias towards women in this situation? And why not men? And if it was the other way around, it'd be different. But it feels like such a simplistic point that, like, well, that's never going to be the case. And we're two different, we interact in so many different ways, and there's so many different variables to what makes a man, a woman, a woman. So for me, that actually, it distances me from the conversation, I think.
But does it distance you because it's a unfair point of view, or does it distance you because it makes you...
I think it's just overly simplistic. And I think, well, that's never going to be the case. So, like, can't we think about this in a different way of, like, yes, that's not okay. But saying that, well, if this happened for women, we look at it very differently. And it's like...
I think I sympathise with that, and it really is a case-by-case basis. And there are people that... I mean, what you're talking about, whataboutism.
Sure.
Where someone talk about women, or what about men?
Sure.
And I find that can be a useful tool. So I don't fully agree with you, because I feel like to say we wouldn't accept that for women highlights a second part of the problem, where we seem to have a fundamentally different value system for women, where we simply wouldn't, like in the UK, for example.
Is that okay, do you think?
What do you mean?
We can't have the same value system.
Well, I mean, let's put it into a real life situation. In the UK, for the past 33 years, boys have been behind girls in education every single year without fail at every single age group. I don't think we would accept that if it was girls that are behind. And although you may not like me saying that,
okay, case by case, I agree on that point.
Okay, and I'm like,
I'm sure there's others that wouldn't.
But the problem, there's two problems there. First of all, boys are behind in education. Yeah. And the second problem is, why does no one care about that?
Yeah.
Because I don't think we would accept that.
But I don't think we need to care about issues like kids being stifled in their creativity in schools. We don't really care about it.
No, but
it's not that we don't care but I just don't think we care about a lot in schools. It's actually really hard to change things. So it's not that that's just a symptom of further things. And to look at that, yes, it's important, but I feel we have that same approach by not looking at it. It's so many other things as well. But I'm glad you're speaking to these things because it's important.
I mean,
but it's like, it's great. It's great information. I need to know these things. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's about sex. I don't think it's about, we have a bias towards, we want girls. I'm not saying that, but it's not that we favour one or the other. It is actually just like a reluctancy to change anything in schools.
But I don't think that's true. Like, one of the reasons why boys are behind is that teachers give them lower marks for the same work. So there is actually a bias against boys in school. Like, if you look at boys and girls' exam results, which is an objective measurement of intelligence, more or less, and compare those to the teacher assessments of those same children, those boys will be marked lower by teachers than the girls. So boys marked lower for the same work as girls, and like that has been shown again and again and again, like even to the point of the CEO of UCAS herself, or the former CEO, she's saying it, and I'm like, if she's saying it and it's been happening for 30 years, then I'm sorry if you don't like that, but that's how it is.
How do we change that? Because it feels very collective.
You need to be a little less sensitive around that conversation and start to accept that actually maybe we do see boys and men. But in a nutshell, my fundamental view of sexism is that we see men. I agree, we see men as more competent when they're not more competent than women.
Yeah, we're harder on them.
Yeah,
sure.
And we see men work as more competent. Like, if you want someone to help reverse a car out, people go find a man. But we also see men as more disposable. That's the cost of being seen as more competent. Women are seen as more incompetent, which I don't agree with. Of course, that's a ridiculous thing to say. But they are also seen as more precious. They are seen as more precious, and that's like that's sort of verbalized with the whole women and children first in a disaster zone. Like, let me give you another real life example. Boko Haram, who are a horrific terrorist group in Nigeria, they abducted 276 Nigerian girls in 2015 or 2014. And I'm sure you might remember, it was like a worldwide phenomenon. You had celebrities all over the red carpet talking about it, holding up signs saying, "Bring back our girls." You had the Chinese government and the American government working together, sharing data. Like, the whole world stopped to save those girls, which I appreciate. And then some of the girls have returned, and it was like more or less a good news story. But then in the 3 or 4 years following that, 10,000 Nigerian boys were taken by Boko Haram, turned into child soldiers or worse. I didn't hear anything. So there does seem to be an asymmetry in the way we're more protective over girls and women than we are of men and boys. And like, if we verbalise that by saying, yeah, we do seem to care more, then I'm willing to have that conversation.
I'm going to invite you into something, and maybe you do it now. I'd love to know if talking about men, men and women, like boys and girls, if talking about boys and girls gets more attention, because I think it would if you spoke just about young boys and young girls. I think we are more likely to be like, to drop and be like, okay, you've got my attention, rather than if you're talking about men and women and those kind of older categories, older people. Do you know what I mean? Highlighting those problems with kids rather than does that get more traction?
I just think we would have to talk about certain issues, and sometimes yes and sometimes no.
Yeah.
Like domestic violence, going back to that, there's about 50 beds in the UK reserved for male victims of abuse. Very difficult to know how big of a problem that is.
Did you watch the Danny Dyer documentary?
Yeah. Terrible, horrible.
I was in that. Did you see
you
me?
In that?
Yeah.
Oh, Martin was it? Did you meet Martin Seeger?
Which episode?
episode 2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did the retreat at the end.
I'm now embarrassed I didn't recognise. I'm going to go and watch
That's
it
so
again.
funny. Yeah, watch it
Great
again.
documentary.
Yeah,
But
do you like it?
Really good, really brave.
Interesting.
And his face just was, he was just like shocked. Like he just like it's almost like just couldn't believe what was going on. But,
yeah, I did not think it was good.
didn't like it.
No.
I didn't like who they spoke to at the beginning. I thought that red pill dude at the beginning.
Sure,
was just an idiot.
in his
It was
garage.
embarrassing.
It was a bit
embarrassing.
strange.
I'm like,
And it felt like Danny Dyer didn't speak his truth at the time, but he went away and then spoke to the camera, and it just felt a bit like I could have just had a conversation with him.
I hate that. That people that the red pillars up, like the Andrew Tates of the world, they're put into the same category as people like me, because I hate them. And that guy was obviously a misogynist. Happy to say that, and I do not. Whatever you want me to say about him, I'll say it.
When you say I hate them, is that not contributing to the us and them even further?
No,
rather than
because
saying
I hate them for the ideas they hold, rather than for who they are. Like,
sure, you hate their ideas,
but all right, well then I'm willing to listen to what he's experienced to make him hate women. Maybe
Sure.
he's abused by his mother.
but I think
maybe he had,
personally, if you have the time to like
all right.
comprehend my like way of like maybe having that and just saying what they speak to, or like separating that person from what they actually speak, because they're just speaking to what they've learned, how they've, the
All right,
context piece.
You changed my mind. Well done. Yeah, all right, fine. I should see him in the context of his experiences too. But it's just so difficult when he's so
it is, man.
obnoxious.
That's the work, right? That's the work.
The second thing that shocked me about that documentary is when they went to speak to the schoolboys about Andrew Tate, and they framed it as if the schoolboys are going to be like, yeah, we love Andrew Tate. And I think those boys gave incredibly grown up, earnest,
they did,
honest
yeah.
answers,
That was
really
good.
mature. And I was just like, it was framed in a way like, oh yeah, look at these boys. And I was like, what they're saying is fair. And like even like the presenter, the teacher, I think it was, like, was trying to antagonize them a little bit. And I was like, these boys are excellent role models for boys. I got no problem with anything they're saying.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know why I didn't like it. Maybe we'll come back.
I think it just, for me, it could have done a lot better. I think it could have done a lot better in actually giving time to understand what it means to be a man in time and place. He didn't speak to that enough, because it was like, what does it mean to be a man? It's like, you're in England, you're Danny Dyer, and we're existing in this certain time on planet Earth. Like, it's going to be very different to what it means to be a man now and what it means to be a man in, India in the 60s. Like, it's just like that needs more emphasis for me, of like, it really does depend on the context and where we're at. Who do we need to be now? Not necessarily like the search of like, who am I and what does it mean to be? It means what you want it to mean, but what can it mean, and what does it need to mean?
I think you're very interested in these very like high level, like theoretical, abstract, spiritual discussions around men. And for someone like you, I'd say, you're not. I wouldn't say you're necessarily the target market.
Oh no.
But someone like me, where like as we discussed, I want to talk about
Sure.
the more tangible political side of
Sure.
men and boys. I want to talk about fathers losing children. I want to talk about men who there's nowhere to go if they're being abused. I want to talk about all those things. So I totally get why maybe you didn't like it, but I won't say that makes it a bad TV show, because it just maybe wasn't right for you.
Yeah.
But going back to the point,
where people are at, I think, for that audience, sure.
But going back to the point that brought me onto that, where if I said, in terms of not wanting to compare women to men, if I said there are 50 abuse beds for men in the UK reserved for men, that doesn't really mean anything, really, unless I say, but there's also more than 3,600 beds for women. That gives you the contrast to the problem, because the problem is not that there are so few for men. The problem is that we don't seem to see abused men as vulnerable or deserving of help as women, which comes back to the second tier problem of male disposability. Men are disposable, women are more precious. And I feel like that's the second problem, and I feel like we do see men and women differently, and that is part of the problem that needs to be looked at and examined too.
And in the documentary, I thought that was represented well, with the guy who talked about with his new partner, his ex, who went through like, pretty awful time of domestic
the man who's fighting for his child.
Yeah,
that was horrifying.
Yeah.
And like that shows, so just in brief detail, it's quite a traumatic story, but a father trying to win custody of his child from his ex-wife. The ex-wife was abusing the child. he was telling the family court system and the police she's abusing the child, I need him back.
Yeah.
She was accusing him of abuse falsely. He didn't lay a hand on the child. He finally, after years and years and years of fighting for the child, got custody from the mother because he realised she's actually not well and she is abusive. And like the day before he got him, she killed a child to stop him from getting it. And that, again, is another reflection of what I'm talking about, where she was seen as a more competent parent purely because she was the mother. And Danny said it well. He was like, we always think the mother is what's best for the child, even when she's abusing that child, and to the point where she'll kill the child before we even realise maybe the father is actually what's best. So,
do you see that out of everything we've discussed changing the most? Do you know what I mean? Custody, and because I do hear about that being a real problem more than probably anything else we've discussed.
What father?
How much custody is, given inherently to mothers?
That's what I mean. Like, that's where, if you want to see women as capable of anything, you need to see them as capable of child abuse as well. And like,
do you see that changing though? Do you see that needle being moved?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen quite a lot of quite high-profile TV shows, like even things like Netflix. People talk about power dynamics that men have over women, and there certainly are power dynamics where men do have and can exercise power over women, but there are also power dynamics where women have power over men, through the one we described through that family court, but also things like Baby Reindeer, where men who are being stalked by women are not taken as seriously, and women do have power. Like, if you think women can't have power over men, you should get that woman to call the police and accuse that man of domestic abuse and see how they respond, and then the following week have the man accuse her and see how they respond. Very different power dynamic. Don't actually do it, it's a waste of police time, but we don't, when a woman is violent towards a man, we don't see it as important.
Yeah.
And when a man's violent towards a woman, although we don't see it as important enough, we still see it as more important than when the roles are reversed. So, I mean, I would, again, increase that resolution to understand the different power dynamics. And if you think women have power over men in all cases, you should go and spend some time in a family court and see how fathers are treated and who has the power there, who has the power when a mother and a father is fighting for the child. And I feel like that will increase the resolution of what you're talking about in terms of power dynamics.
Are you putting together, because you like to dive into studies and do that sort of thing, so are you putting together things? Are you looking at, or have you done that, put papers together before? Like, how's this? Publications?
I recognise my strengths and weaknesses. I'm not an academic, I'm a creative. I would say I'm an expert in communications.
Okay.
But I do collaborate with researchers. I collaborate with a researcher, I think I shout her out every single podcast I do, called Susie Bennett. In my opinion, doing the most seminal work in male suicide in the world. The work I've helped her with in terms of getting men to submit their ideas to is being published in the world's leading journals right now, Psychological Bulletin. And I am very proud that I could help her do that. The problem with men is that they're very reluctant to share their thoughts and feelings, and that's why someone like me can help men share their experiences and what causes suicidality. And Susie, of course, is a woman, and she recognises, as I do, the work for male suicide needs to be led by men, suicidal men especially, and bereaved families who have lost men to suicide. So with that in mind, she's constantly asking me to help her get men such as yourself to contribute. Tell me about your experience of suicide. Have you ever considered it? Have you ever attempted? Do you know men that have attempted or completed suicide? And I'm very proud that I can help use my community of lots and lots of men, tens of thousands of men, to help make sure her work is the most relevant and impactful as possible. We're basically writing an agenda of male suicide research where we're asking men, what are the most important issues that you want to know more about in terms of male suicide? And the number one priority is male loneliness. So that was endorsed by 98% of people responding as a very important issue. And so, yeah, I'm happy that I could help in my small way, but you won't see me in a lab coat anytime soon. It's just not what I'm cut out for.
AI is pretty good these days.
Oh my God, yeah.
Throw some stuff together.
It's just not what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, that's fair. I just felt cool to ask. What have we missed from this conversation that you want to share? Or an invitation for the audience? I think a lot of my audience are going to land with, and you've got a lot of ears and eyes.
I always want to talk to people who are new to this area of discussion. and understand better your first knee-jerk reaction, which is often negative, or like it prickles. Like I'm very interested in how people feel about that. I'd often, when I was single, I would go on quite a lot of dates with different women, and inevitably this would come up, and I would just be like, I really want to know how you feel about it. A lot of them really appreciated it, these issues, and I really want to know why people are so reluctant to talk about it. Why are we so willing to let boys fall behind in education, or men kill themselves in such alarmingly high rates, or why we don't care that so many fathers are losing children? Like, why are we so sort of, what this male malaise, where we're just like, why are we so insensitive to it?
It's interesting.
Like, why in London, for example, like why year after year after year, dozens of young, normally black boys are stabbed to death, killed. The number one victim of violent crime, young black boys in inner city. Why is the conversation of violent crime centred on women, like especially like middle class white women? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. That to me is all that matter, because you're basically diverting the conversation away from the person most at risk, which is young black boys, and you're talking about women who are actually the least at risk to violent crime.
What about funding? Do you see like inconsistencies in those sorts of things, like areas of?
Yeah. I mean, in the UK, we have a Minister for Women, we have a Minister for Women's Health, and now we have an Ambassador for Women's Health. And I don't begrudge any of those. More the merrier. But when you consider men are dying at such high rates and have higher mortality rates in every group, and lead in more or less all of the leading causes of death, I don't know why there is no Minister for Men's Health. Like, for male suicide, again, the number one cause of death.
That is shocking.
And I'm like, how is that not a big enough priority to have a Minister for Men on its own?
Job?
Sorry?
Do you want the job?
No, everyone keeps asking me that. Like, I'm not. No, I'm in a good spot. I'm here just to provoke people and ask provocative questions. I think I'd be a nightmare politician.
What could you be doing more of?
I think I'm doing enough. People are always like, write a book, or do a PhD, or get onto TikTok, or can you translate this into Spanish? And I'm like, I'm doing plenty, and like my time is like, I don't have much of it.
Okay, what could you do less of?
Probably less time in the comments.
Okay.
But sometimes you just can't resist.
You can't resist.
Just when people try to like really like wave away some of the things I'm saying in a way that I think is harmful.
Does it work?
No. Those people are often entrenched in their point of view, and it doesn't matter. I remember talking to one of these people. I was like, right, I'm going to try my very best to change her mind, and it was about fathers' rights, and she just didn't believe that fathers had less rights than women in the UK. So I bring up the Children Act, which is the legislation that governs who has rights and who doesn't. I was like, there you go. And she's like, I don't believe you still. And I was like, okay, I'm going to highlight the clause where it says this thing. And I was like, there you go. Still didn't change her mind.
And I literally said, what I was saying earlier about,
I was like, what will it take to change your mind then? And then they'll say nothing. And I'm like, well then, this is a waste of my time. If I can't do anything to change your mind, that should be raising alarm bells.
Maybe at the time. But I think it comes down to the capacity someone has to change their mind, regardless of the information.
And like I said, like, people don't change their mind in the moment. They'll change it like the next day in the shower.
Sure.
Or like they'll maybe not even realising it. And never in a radical way. It would be like, oh, maybe I moved the dial slightly in her mind, perhaps. Yeah, and it's very difficult. And in that context, I remind myself that although people like her may not be able to have their mind changed, the people reading that conversation quietly can have their mind changed more easily. And I always call them like the silent readers. They're people that aren't commenting but are reading what I'm saying.
Which is the majority, maybe.
Yeah, massive majority. Like I said, these people that are causing all the throwing the stones, they're a very small, disproportionately loud minority of people that are taking up all the oxygen in the room. Most people are very much able to change their mind. And I remind myself that let's use this as an example to present myself as a more understanding, compassionate person, because there are loads of people reading. There are loads of people watching this podcast. And maybe I won't change your mind, but people reading this or watching this podcast, maybe I'll change theirs. And you're just one person, and I don't know, thousands might be watching. So I'm talking to them as much as I'm talking to you, perhaps even more so.
Yeah.
Same with the comments.
Well, it's like podcasting, yes, there's a lot of it. Yes, we're information rich and experience poor, and you could talk about that. However, I think podcasts and what that's done to, in a global sense, of like how we can spread information and ideas and perspectives so quickly, again, tonic and also the toxic thing, often in equal measure, but the capacity it has, I think, just keep beating the drum. And
I do feel like social media in general is often you're looking through very complex issues of a tiny little keyhole.
Sure.
But podcast kind of books that trend because this is an hour and a half long conversation that does go into quite a lot of detail. And I'm a believer in podcasts.
And people can sit with it out of the spaces too, because sometimes it's really alarming to be sat with uncomfortable sensations that are actually rooted in your identity. The people that have listened to this podcast and they've sat with it and they've listened to it again, and I do invite that in if something has triggered you emotionally charged. There's a charge there, because I had Mars Lord talking about why pregnancy is dangerous for black women in birth. 1 in 7. It's like, no, it's what is it like? It's 5 times more likely for black women to die in pregnancy in this country than white women. It's like, what's going on there?
Interesting. Well, I guess interesting thing might be like, is that normalised for where those women are living? Are you normalising per like socioeconomic group? Are they more likely to die because they're black, or is it because they're in cities or from a lower socioeconomic class? Like, I'm in a city.
Yeah, that's a good question.
If I could ever call up a GP, I know I'm not going to get an answer. But my mum, who calls in the countryside, will get an answer.
It's a good question, but even if it is in the city, it's still a problem, right?
But do you think people that live in the city have higher mortality rates of death and pregnancy?
I don't know.
They probably would.
But why does that?
Well, it's a bit like when black communities had higher rates of death from COVID. It wasn't necessarily because they were black, it's because they were living in cities, and people in cities live close together.
Less in rural areas.
And Indian families especially, Leicester, for example, massive rates of COVID.
I'm sure she's got that question before, but
but that's not because Indian people were more vulnerable necessarily, it's because they live in extended families in the same house.
I did do a bit of research, and the first person I asked was, yes, there was racism in her workplace.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
but that's I would just like to know, has that stat been normalised to compare like for like? Because it wouldn't be right to compare a pregnant woman living in a leafy suburb with a black woman who's pregnant in a city, because they're different backgrounds. You'd have to compare a black woman and a white woman in the countryside, or a white woman and a black woman in a city, to get a true result. And I think it probably would still be more high mortality for black women, but not as high as the one you stated. But
you've got your data brain on, and it's good how we make sense of this information.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a skeptic, but I mean, I don't want to deny the fact
not
that
racist.
I wouldn't surprise me at all. I would just like to make sure the data's been processed fairly for the benefit of black women most of all.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. It's been so fun.
No, yeah, it's been good fun, and thank you for challenging me a little bit. I mean, it's refreshing to have a podcaster not take everything I'm saying as gospel and to push back a little bit, and I want to see more of that.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother. Anything you want to point people to? Anything lastly that you...
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on the Tin Men. Like I said, I'm only one person, so I concentrate mostly on Instagram. I am on Twitter now, but Instagram's the main focal point, and it's the Tin Men, all one word. And you can find me there. And even if you don't agree, even if you hate what I've said, I'd still invite you to follow and join the conversation, change my mind in a way you've changed your mind a little bit, and other people will in the comments to come.
Beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Yes. Here's a hug. Oh. He's just... Thank you, bro.